So, we really aren't letting up today. It would seem that feminists have run into a problem, a perception problem. People see it as a hate group. And what are feminists doing to change this perception? Well, they're going to write article after article telling you about how it is really about how feminism is really for equality. As we see today, March 31st, in a transcript, let's say, of an interview on Forbes, titled True Feminism is About Equality for Both Genders, by Bonnie Marcus. And she's interviewing Teresa Younger, who is the CEO and president of the Miss Foundation. According to Teresa Younger, the CEO and president of the Miss Foundation, it's a new day in the conversation around where women's voices are socioeconomically and politically. Nobody's listening to them. What can you say? Nobody's giving these women a voice. They can vote, they can fucking hold office, but nobody's giving them a voice. What the fuck, America? You're more than 50% women voting here, and you can't give these women a fucking voice. On the grassroots side, women and their impact within communities have always been there. In the political realm, however, women's voices are really coming to the forefront. Discussions and debates about feminism have recently surfaced. What recently surfaced? You've been fucking harping on this for years, for decades. I don't know where the correlation here is between women's voices and feminism. Is feminism the only one giving women a voice? I guess they think so. They'd like to take credit for that. I recently spoke with Teresa about feminism today, and how the Miss Foundation is working to help create equality for both genders. Right. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Equality. You know, some pigs are more equal than others. That's a kind of equality. So Bonnie Marcus asks Teresa Younger, what is your definition of feminism? And like a good little feminist, Teresa Younger recites verbatim the dictionary definition, pretty much. Teresa Younger, the definition, as I have spent my life believing it to be, is the belief that men and women should have equal social, political, and economic rights and opportunities. I do think that this is the most inclusive definition of what feminism is about. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't automatically choose the most inclusive, the possible interpretation of a word. What's the most inclusive definition of a Nazi? It's about equality for both men and women, and a playing field that respects the voices of women, but not men. We should respect the voices of women simply because they're women. See, now, my voice as a man is not respected just because I'm a man. I have to earn that respect. If I talk bullshit, people will treat me as if my voice is bullshit. But apparently, that is not the same standard we should apply to women. All women deserve an equal voice because they're women. True equality, true, everything's true. Just stick true in front of every other word. True equality, true feminism, is recognition of the dynamics that each person brings to the table. And I say, quote, each person because women will have reached truest levels of equality when men also have truest levels of equality. I'm pretty sure that's a non sequitur. As long as we stay and assign task and duty, responsibility and opportunity to a particular gender, then we are not actually striving for true feminism. So please, stop telling men not to rape. You are assigning task and duty and responsibility to that particular gender. You fucking hypocrites. Marcus, it was my impression that in the early years of the women's movement, feminism was power for women. It was more a women's movement than anything else. Younger. I think at the time, there was such an imbalance of power that you had to recognize the need to at least get some balance of power to women, some recognition that women should have choices and opportunities outside the home and in the home itself. Today, I believe it should be I, recognize that your version of true feminism is the true equality of true sexes. Wait, I just put too many trues in there. Today, we recognize that true feminism is the true equality of both sexes, without it being limited or restricted. And we actually have more young men and young women growing up today that have been raised in more feminist households, where men and women do a share of work in the house. They both have opportunities for education and for job opportunities, and you're just so redundant in the way you phrase your sentences. Jobs are not labeled for men and for women. There's still not true equality, and there's still true job segregation. What? If your jobs are not labeled for men and women, how is there still true job segregation? That doesn't make any sense. You just contradicted yourself there. But in that context, there was a time in the late 60s and early 70s when the term feminism started growing, and when the Miss Foundation started that, there was a true second. What? These sentences are the most horrendous. But in that context, there was a time in the late 60s and early 70s when the term feminism started growing, and when the Mrs. Foundation started that, there was a true segregation. The sentence is atrocious. How can you publish this in Forbes? It ends with a period, and then it starts the sentence with and now I think the feminist movement had to take on, quote, the women's movement, because, men would name their movement the feminist movement. It had nothing to do with women's movement until they decided to take it on. Whatever the fuck. The women's perspective, so that it could get a mainstream conversation. It could get a mainstream... Why would the patriarchy allow a women's movement if they're controlling the feminist narrative? Why would that be a requirement to get mainstream conversation if it's being so demonized by the patriarchy? It doesn't make any fucking sense. Marcus. And has the foundation changed their brand to reflect that? Reflect whatever sort of mental gymnastics you used in the past 5 minutes of this article? And has the foundation changed their brand to reflect that from the beginning years? Younger. Our brand hasn't changed, actually. We're just as sexist now as we were then. From the beginning years, the Miss Foundation has been about investing in grassroots networks, innovative networks of women who are making changes within their communities, and that hasn't changed. 40 years ago, our first grant was around the ubiquitous domestic violence, at a time when people weren't even talking about domestic violence. Our first grant-making dollars, now it's grant-making, came from the Free to Be You and Me, some Free to Be Foundation, understanding of the intersection about how the lives of women and the mother and her own safety affect the lives of children in the household. No mention of the father. We've completely and utterly excluded him from the equation. Not how the father's own financial stability can affect the lives of his children in his household. And yet, we stand for equality. All we care about is the own safety of the mother and the financial stability of the mother. We are for equality. Do you know? True equality, by the way. This is true equality. This is true feminism. The focus was to make sure they actually have the support and services they need to have. You fucking idiot. How many men's shelters do you fucking see in America? How many? Because I guarantee you, in every community, there is at least one woman's shelter. How is that not having the support and services you need? Society is biased in your favor. 41 years later, the Miss Foundation is now commenting on the culture of sexism and violence through the NFL. You should have known they'd attack the NFL. They fucking hate the NFL. Such a misogynist and macho sport. I mean, just look at the way they exclude women. No women allowed in the NFL. Through the NFL, which has dominated a conversation around domestic violence, but is now actually addressing the culture of sexism and violence. We live in a fucking culture of sexism. Yes, and it is a fucking culture of women-positive sexism, where we are institutionally discriminating against men. We immediately assume the word of a woman at face value when confronted with rape allegations. We set up lynch mobs before investigations are concluded. And this is the exact sort of culture of sexism and violence. Did you see the way the protesters destroyed property? Continuing on, younger. So I don't think we've changed. We are still looking at the systemic issues that are impacting communities. And we do that by supporting predominantly, read all only, women's organizations to make sure that they are supported in their leadership and that their voices are valued in this process. The overall mission of the Miss Foundation is to look at the collective power of men and women. It's not just any one person, it's about how to keep adding one and one and one. And they literally use the numerical ones, even though you're not supposed to do that. It's about how to keep adding one and one and one to really build that collective power and those collective forces to get something done. Marcus, why do you think millennials have an issue with feminism? Younger. I think it's been interesting because you've got millennials who are identifying themselves as feminists, like Beyonce. For a long time, the definition of feminism has been defined by the opponents. And of course, if you want the true definition, you go straight to the source. When we were wondering what the definition of a Nazi was, we went and asked the Nazis, and they said, "We really aren't Jew haters. We believe in true equality for all." For a long time, the definition of feminism has been defined by the opponents that want to divide the population and those supporters. It's funny, it's just unbelievably fucking ironic that you say that. That's exactly what your movement does. That's exactly what feminism does. It is about segregation. It divides people up according to their gender. Generally, if you just give the definition of feminism without the label in any conversation, most people are on the same page. The difference is the perception. It's about how they label that. A year ago, Time magazine said that we didn't need to be talking about feminism anymore. They suggested the word feminism be banned. And many people pushed back and said, quote, "Actually, we do need to be talking about feminism." I think the feminists pushed back and said, "Actually, we need to remain relevant," as they are increasingly becoming less relevant. Time magazine was coerced into issuing an apology later on. And even at the end of the calendar year, the Miss Foundation and Cosmopolitan identified 10 celebrity feminists. Well done. Bravo. How that's amazing. You figured out, what, you went and asked 10 of them? How do you identify 10? Why only 10? It's so seemingly arbitrary. And even at the end of the year, the Miss Foundation and Cosmopolitan identified 10 celebrity feminists. Yeah, okay, you go the world over and look for 10 celebrities who will call themselves feminists. So what? You're always looking for this validation from celebrities for some reason. We received nominations from all over the country of celebrity feminists who embody and encompass what feminism is, what your definition of feminism is, and how they define it. No, how you want them to define it. Most of the support came from the predictable, gullible millennials who've been brainwashed in our public schools by feminists for so long, they don't have the brains to think. As long as we believe in the same principles to measure equality and opportunity, I'm not going to judge anyone for not, quote, calling it feminism, except you kind of fucking are. Why are you so insistent on labeling people feminists if you're not going to judge people for not calling it feminism? You should have that choice, which is what feminism is ultimately about, choice. No irony there whatsoever. It's about giving women and men a full cadre of choices about what they can do, what they want to do, and how they can get those goals accomplished. Marcus, what are the reasons some people push back on feminism today? These questions, they're so poorly formed. Unbelievable. What are their reasons some people push back on feminism today? Maybe I don't speak English anymore. But that sentence, there's just something wrong with it. Younger. In my experience, that pushback comes from the perception that feminists don't like men. Well, gee, I wonder where we got that perception. It's not inclusive, and it only reflects the interests and priorities of one race and ethnicity. Actually, the ethnicity you're wrong about, because you're always harping on about minorities. In other words, women of color, how they're more important than white women, even in feminism. So you got that little struggle for power dynamic going on right there. But yes, it does only reflect the interests. What? Oh, I didn't even say it. This doesn't make any sense at all. It says it's not inclusive and only reflects the interests and priorities of one race and ethnicity. No, that's not the reason that we have the perception that feminists don't like men. It's because they're biased against men, that are actually sexist against men. It has nothing to do with race and ethnicity. Yeah, why would men really care about that? We care about the fact that you are profiling, you are actively disenfranchising men. So Marcus continues and says, so it's really their misperception. Of course it is their misperception. When you have a religion, the truisms at its heart, at its core, are never wrong. What you do, you instruct a narrative to fit your religion. They set out with a model and attempt to prove it, as opposed to you gathering evidence to create a model. And that's exactly what you're doing here. Younger. This is after the Marcus saying, it's their misconception. Younger, right. And I think the reality is that we don't have a true, quote-unquote, her story of what happened with the women's movement, because it was written by the patriarchy. Everything has been narrowed down to 1 or 5 names that show up in a history book, if they even show up in a history book. And 1 month out of the year where we really celebrate the complexity, diversity of what the women's movement has looked like, and what feminism can and should be, and how it is reflected nationally and internationally. Men don't even have a fucking month. Show me men's month. Yeah? How many months should we be celebrating women? What? One month of a year isn't good enough, because men don't have any months out of the year. You are continually operating on this misguided perception that for some reason every day is Men's Day, and it isn't. Yeah, see, that just is true. I mean, I don't have to provide any evidence of that either. I can just say that. You said true feminism, I'm saying, yeah, fuck it. We're equally qualified to say shit. When people push back, they push back for a variety of reasons. Of course, none of them are your fault now, are they? It is their misconceptions. You could possibly be wrong. Sometimes they believe that history doesn't reflect who they are. Sometimes they are pushing back because they don't want to label themselves. But the principle of equality is really a principle that's agreed on. You're the one who's trying to label them. No wonder they push back. Why won't you stop fucking labeling people? You said they don't need to be labeled for you to, I don't know, respect them. You just said it a couple paragraphs ago. I spoke a couple of months ago to some machine unionists, and I called the machine unionists feminists. See, right there you go. You had to go and fucking label them. What the fuck? Everybody kind of squirmed in their seat, but they are such complete wusses, they didn't stand up and say, fuck you. Squirmed in their seat, but when I gave them the definition as you interpret it, and as Webster's dictionary, it's always convenient that you go back to the dictionary when it suits you. The rest of the time you'll be spouting so much bullshit that is not even found within the pages of the dictionary, creating your own definitions for words as you see fit, but the minute it actually fits your narrative, you go running to Webster's dictionary to justify your movement. And as Webster's dictionary sees it, and we all reached an agreement, they were all fucking feminists. And you successfully labeled them. Well done. Bravo! Sometimes it's about the labeling on the front end, and not the principle of the action. The principle of the action is very much supported in this country, I believe. Unbelievable contradictions. You have the narrative. The mainstream runs with your narrative. And yet you have the audacity to say in the beginning that your narrative was not accepted, that it was not being perpetuated. Marcus, how do we overcome the challenge of not having written history of this movement? Well, we need more feminists to write more books, obviously. Or are they still illiterate? There are more ways to learn history. Young men and women have more opportunities to hear about it, whether it's written down in history books or not. Because why should we go by history books? We should just listen and believe to people's experiences. History books are by no means an objective look at it, or as objective as humanly possible. I mean, you're invalidating somebody's experiences if you only listen to the history books. I should be running all over the world trying to find some whack job living on a mountainside, covering themselves in dirt to get their unique take on the history of the world. Because apparently society at large is unable to reach some sort of informed consensus on the subject, at least according to feminists. There is a heightened level of information out there that people are getting access to. It's called the internet. And hopefully you'll be watching this on the internet as well. So yes, the perpetuation of knowledge is critical in this generation. It's just a matter of continually sharing it. We can't just assume that millennials or Gen Xers don't want to fight for the rights they have. They are doing it in their way. And you don't fucking like that. It's not good enough because they're not calling themselves feminists. They're not using your label. That way might be slightly different from how others have done it in the past. It doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means there are different ways of communicating and building the movement to make sure that you ensure the rights of all people, that we ensure the rights of all peoples by disenfranchising some and promoting others in your little supremacist movement. Marcus, what's on the agenda for the Miss Foundation this year? Younger, we are going to continue to do what we have done. That's a great mission statement. What is your mission statement? We're going to continue doing what we've done. I mean, that is not ambiguous in any sense of the word, is it? Fucking unbelievably vague. With our grant making and program support for grassroots organizations in the areas of health, safety, and economic justice for women. I added for women. They haven't said one thing about helping men yet, so I'm just going to say, I think it's safe to assume that health, safety, and economic justice is about women. I mean, we're not doing enough. There isn't enough economic justice for women yet. Equal opportunity, that wasn't enough. They can vote, they can hold office, not enough. We just need to start throwing money at them, obviously, because that's economic justice. We're going to continue to hold institutions accountable by asking the questions and giving the information to men and women out there around the work that's so critical that needs to get done. Another purposely vague mission statement. Asking the questions, the information about the work that's so critical, that's purposely vague. It doesn't fucking mean anything. It can mean anything you want it to mean. And we're going to continue to make sure that women's voices in leadership are seen and heard, because women, I'm sorry, you're just not doing enough to make other women's voices heard. You can vote for women candidates, but for some reason you don't. What is your problem? You're not helping feminism here. You need to get on board with this movement, because women's voices are more important. Men have had a voice for far too long. Women should have a voice simply because it's their turn. It doesn't matter if they have anything worthwhile to say, they just need a fucking voice. And we should be there. We should be holding microphones in front of them. We're a philanthropic organization. We raise money and we give it away to women. But overall, only 6% of total philanthropic dollars in this country are going to women and girls. Are the rest going to men? Because you don't cite any research in this area. Citation is needed. Where do you just pull a 6% out of your ass for this one? Overall, only 6% of total philanthropic dollars in this country are going to men and boys. There. See, I can make up the same sort of intellectually dishonest bullshit that you spew. As a philanthropic entity, we are encouraging people to give their dollars in places that affect women and girls. Not men, but we are for equality, so that we can make sure their voices are heard. Because they're just incapable of making their voices heard without money. I just don't understand this. Why aren't we listening to women without money? It must be because they're women. We just really hate them. These philanthropic dollars add up to making determinations around what can happen in communities. Another purposely vague sentence. It's not just what happens in Washington, but it's what happens in every single community. That is what I find really exciting about the Miss Foundation. For 40 plus years, we have been funding grassroots, innovative nonprofits that are able to make changes within communities. Then we're able to duplicate those efforts in the collective within other parts of the country. Marcus, how can men and women who are reading this get involved and support the Foundation's efforts? I'm sure you'll be glad to tell us, younger. As I mentioned before, the Miss Foundations is a 501c3. We are able to do the work and be successful at what we do from the dollars that we get in. We encourage people to go to www.forwomen.org and make a contribution, because as much as we like to say that we are for equality, our fucking domain name says we are for women. Not for equality. Not for men, not for women and men, not for men and women, just for women. That's true fucking equality right there. More importantly, we invite them to go to our website, or even look in their own communities for organizations that are doing the grassroots work, and find out how they can be supportive and helpful to those organizations. We all have to start in our own backyards, and we all have to do the work that needs to get done in order to have a greater impact. We all have to do the work that needs to get done. Another purposely vague and ambiguous mission statement. Why do I cover these articles? Because they have a platform that they'll get to spew their shit on, and if I don't call them out, who's going to call them out? We need to call this out. We don't have such a platform to point out the hypocrisy and the constant professional victim card that these people play to get publication in major magazines such as Forbes or the New York Times. That is why I cover this. Thank you for listening, and until next time, farewell.